But now I want to move on to at least what I happen to be most interested in and what Nozick and Nielsen are most interested in too. Part one of Principle B. Part one of Principle B says that some inequalities might be okay, but only if they're to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. Right? This is what Rawls calls the difference principle. It is what we'll discuss for the rest of this lecture, and like I said, it's where both Nozick and Nielsen focus most of their very different objections. Right? The difference principle. Social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they're to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. All right, we're going to talk about what that means and why Rawls thinks it's reasonable to agree to that principle. Right? Why does Rawls think that we, or our lawyers, could rationally agree, and could only rationally agree, to the difference principle? Well, let's take a step back. So according to Rawls, an equal distribution, where everybody gets the same primary social goods, or same amount of primary social goods, that's the benchmark. Right? That's the kind of initial position out of which we'd have to be argued. It says, imagine then a hypothetical initial arrangement in which all the social primary goods were equally distributed. Everyone has similar rights and duties, and income and wealth are evenly shared. This state of affairs provides a benchmark for judging improvements. Now, why does Rawls think equality is the benchmark? Well, why might we think so? Right? What's kind of morally interesting or morally kind of compelling about equality, at least at first blush? Well, consider, so there's kind of two kinds of arguments for choosing an equal distribution of rights and liberties, powers and opportunities, and income and wealth. Right? There's kind of arguments from within Rawls's framework, but there's also arguments we can give kind of from outside of Rawls's framework. These arguments from outside of Rawls's framework we can talk about as external arguments for equality. Right? You might think that equality makes sense because, look, think back to Kant, right? We're all ends in ourselves. Right? Another way to put that is that we all have equal dignity. And you might think that given our equal dignity, we should all be treated roughly the same, right? And you might think that to kind of ensure equal treatment that acknowledges equal dignity, that requires us to be kind of roughly equal in a material sense, right? In terms of not only rights and liberties, but also income and wealth, right? That just seems like kind of a very initially intuitive, a very initially plausible kind of argument in favor of equal distributions of goods, right? But from within, even from within the context of Rawls's view, we can see a very powerful argument for accepting an equal distribution, right? So think about, imagine that your lawyer has been in the original position, and he, along with everybody else's lawyer, picked an equal distribution, like that represented on the left side, on the left graph in front of you right now. What can your lawyer say to you to justify that choice? Well, look, he can say, I got you as good a deal as anybody got, right? I got you at least as good a deal as anybody got. You didn't get less primary social goods than anybody else. And that's pretty persuasive, right? I mean, that's pretty powerful bit of reasoning that your lawyer can make to justify their choice, right? And so that's kind of more internal argument for favoring an equal distribution. Now, think about that internal case and compare the equal distribution on the left there to what we might think of as the utility maximizing distribution on the right. That internal case we just considered serves as a good argument against the utilitarian distribution too, it looks like, right? Because even if the distribution here labeled utility produces more overall net happiness than the one labeled equality, you could still reasonably complain if your lawyer picked utility, right? Because you did not do, suppose you're one of the people in utility that's on the bottom there, you did not do as well as you could have. And so in a straightforward sense, your lawyer blew it, Your lawyer did not do their job, which was to get you the best deal possible, right? So these are very good arguments for equality, right? So that's why I think we should understand equality as the benchmark. And as we'll see next week, right, Kai Nielsen basically defends a version of equality too. Okay, so if equality is the benchmark, and it seems like a more rational choice than the utilitarian distribution, shouldn't we forbid material inequalities, right? Shouldn't we forbid inequalities of wealth or income? Right, that's the deep question here. Why not be full egalitarian? Right? Why allow the inequalities that Rawls does? Well, here's the kind of case that Rawls is interested in. So consider the following comparison. On the left, we have equality again, and on the right, we have a scenario that we can call inequality to everyone's advantage. All right? Now, if these are both options available to us, right? If we could choose between different principles, one of which generated equality, one of which generated an inequality to everyone's advantage, you might think that you should choose the latter, right? So suppose you could choose between these distributions, or your lawyer in the original position could choose between these distributions. In this case, your lawyer could justify choosing the distribution on the right, that is inequality to everyone's advantage, in the following way. Yeah, so suppose your lawyer chose inequality to everyone's advantage. Here's what he could say to you when he got out. He says, look, you were guaranteed to be better off with this choice, no matter who you were, than if I had chosen equality. So the one I chose is the rational one, right? Look, no matter who you are in this unequal society, you're better off in terms of primary social goods than anybody is in the equal society. And the lawyer says, look, so I got you the best deal I could, right? I made sure that you got a better deal no matter who you were than had we gone with equality. And that seems like pretty damn compelling reasoning, right? Extremely compelling reasoning. And that's Rawls's basic argument for the difference principle, right? If particular inequalities maximize the position, that is, increase the position of the worst off people in society as much as possible, then nobody can rationally complain about those inequalities, right? Those inequalities make at least some people better off, and nobody is made worse off, right? To put it another way, no matter who you are, you win, right? So this looks like very compelling reasoning for favoring the distribution on the right to the distribution on the left, and so that's what Rawls thinks we should choose. Now, you might think that this is all kind of fantastical, right? How would that be possible? Is it ever possible that inequalities would make some people better off without making somebody worse off? Right? What we're usually familiar with is that inequalities where some get better off come at the expense of other people, right? They make other people worse off. So does it ever happen like in this scenario just described? Well, I mean, defenders of capitalism often argue that capitalism does that, for example, right? They argue that by letting some people become really rich, right, by allowing for this big inequality, everybody is made better off. Why? Because, for example, at least some people will work harder or smarter or whatever to become really rich, and we'll all benefit from their efforts or their ingenuity or whatever. Okay, that's an argument you often hear in favor of capitalism. Right? The old President Ronald Reagan's use of the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats, I think could be interpreted as a version of this idea. Right? The idea that, like, if we allow for massive inequalities, then GDP the gross domestic product will go up, and we all benefit by an increase in gross domestic product, something like that. Now, is that true about capitalism or not? It's hotly debated, and we'll talk more about it in the next couple of weeks. But for the narrow point here with respect to Rawls is that Rawls is at least open to the possibility that this kind of argument is a good one. Right? Rawls thinks that whatever capitalism in particular is like, right? It's an if there are inequalities like those on the graph on the previous slide, right? If there are inequalities that maximize the position of the worst off, then it would be rational. We should choose societies or distributions that include them over more equal societies, right? So if, right, Rawls is just saying that if inequality to everyone's advantage is possible, that's the rational choice, and that's what the difference principle allows for. And so, at long last, we arrive at our two principles of justice, right? Principles A and B, and thus we conclude our argument, right? For a distribution of goods to be just, it has to be fair. For it to be fair, we all have to be able to rationally agree to it. For us to rationally agree to it, we have to be able to agree to it from behind the veil of ignorance in the original position. And then the only two principles we could agree to in the original position are principles A and B. And so that is now our account of what justice consists in, right? We know whether our society is just or not by seeing whether it satisfies those two principles.